has made, and we rejoice and be glad in it. We really appreciate your time you take to come and watch what we say. It's very important. And we ask that if you watch us, share it to your people too, so that everybody will get something from what we are doing. Today we are going to talk about a very interesting subject. We all ask for it. Sometimes we don't know how to find it. But today we are going to have somebody to explain to us further how to find this. It's very important in our life. We need it daily as we go. So we are talking on wisdom. The subject is wisdom. I know it is something you have thought about in your life at a point. And today we have somebody to help us understand it better. So without much ado, I'm going to have her introduce herself to us, and then we take the discussion from there. Don't go away, stay with us. So hi. Welcome once again to EMAV TV. We really appreciate you coming.
Thank you. Well, thank you for the invitation to be here.
So I want you to please introduce yourself to our audience, and then we take it from there.
I am Christine Roy Yoder. I teach Old Testament at Columbia Theological Seminary. I've been here for about 22 years. I'm an ordained pastor in the Presbyterian Church USA, and I live here in Decatur, happily married for almost 30 years. And so grateful to be in this community and to have occasions like this to talk about topics that are near and dear to our hearts and that prompt a lot of prayer and reflection among us. So I'm delighted to be with you all this morning.
Thank you very much. So we go on to the actual thing. So wisdom.
Yes.
Wisdom. When we say wisdom, what does it mean?
Yes.
What goes into wisdom?
I really appreciated your opening comments about wisdom, that so often we are seeking wisdom. I expect many of us know people we would describe as wise.
Yes.
And many of us have been in situations where we have hoped that there would be more wisdom. We recognize it as lacking somehow in a conversation or in an experience. The whole concept of wisdom, this attribute or this capacity, has really been at the heart of the work I've done almost now for 20 years. It is an important topic in the Bible, and my work has been largely looking at the literature that we typically think of as wisdom literature. In the Christian Bible, Christian canon, those are particularly the books of Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes. So that's where I've been working. But I think it's important to say up front that wisdom is an international phenomenon, that even though ancient Israel, our scriptures, have a particular collection of books that are seeking this capacity, this is something that every culture seeks, and every culture has some expression of, often in the form of proverbs or wise teachings. So biblically, when we turn, we see a whole collection, of course, of proverbs in the book of Proverbs. One other thing I'd like to say up front is that for ancient Israel, wisdom was really associated with King Solomon. You may remember when King Solomon, the son of David, came to the throne, the very first thing that Solomon did was pray for wisdom, a discerning mind in order to govern the people of God. The quality of wisdom was something Solomon recognized as really important for leadership. Now God responded to Solomon's prayer with wisdom and honor and all sorts of other things that made his leadership possible. But you'll remember in the story in 1 Kings, right after Solomon receives wisdom, it's tested. His wisdom is tested by these two women and the one child.
Yes.
So Solomon proves to be a wise king as a result of that. And his wisdom is celebrated. We have a text in 1 Kings 4 that describes that people came from all over the world in order to learn from Solomon. And he would teach them by speaking about the fish and the hyssop that grows in the wall and all these aspects of the world that he was observing and found wisdom in. So when we think about Proverbs, even Ecclesiastes, these are traditions that explicitly or implicitly are associated with Solomon. So what is wisdom exactly, as our ancient foremothers and forefathers understood it? Well, one thing it is certainly is a worldview. Wisdom in the scriptures really begins from the human as the point of orientation and asks, what's good? What's wise? what is the way I can navigate, that's even a word that's used for wisdom, sort of like steering a boat. How is it that I can navigate my life wisely? And the ancients would turn to a host of different sources for wisdom. So one of the valued places they turned to were elders. They talk about gray hair as the crown, that lived experience, street smarts. The capacity to survive is in and of itself an expression of wisdom. So whereas in North America, Western cultures, were increasingly prioritizing and valuing youth.
Yes.
This is a tradition that says, do not be so quick to dismiss the wisdom, the earned knowledge of those who have lived life and lived life fully and well. So elders are a vital source of wisdom.
Yeah.
Their experience is critically important for the next generation to learn from. Secondly, they talk about artisans and craftspeople, people who have a skill, a particular learned skill, as being wise. The ability to craft a tapestry or to build a ship or to work with metal and create tools. All of these were seen as expressions of wisdom. There's something about that capacity, the artistry, the creativity, the resourcefulness that's seen as wise. They also look to the natural world. So there's a whole collection of proverbs that we talk about as go to the ant proverbs.
Mm-hmm.
Proverbs 6, you can look at Proverbs 30. These are all proverbs that say look to even the smallest of creatures, the ant, right? And there's something to be learned about how to be a creature of God by observing another creature of God.
Yes.
Go to the ant, you lazy bones, Proverbs 6 says, and learn something about industriousness, right?
Yes.
You don't have to be prompted. There's no captain, there's no guard telling the ant to gather its food when there is food and to live on that food when there's famine.
Yeah.
There's a real sense that the ant has its own integrity, its own way of navigating in the world because it's a creature of God that teaches us something about what wisdom is.
Yes.
So the natural world is another important resource for learning about God's wisdom and the wisdom that can guide our own lives. And lastly, of all the traditions in the Old Testament especially, the tradition that is most explicitly ecumenical, most explicitly international is wisdom. Because the ancients believed God had formed the world and God's wisdom was then woven into the world, all peoples have some wisdom to share. And so we ought to be, just exactly like those who came to King Solomon did, we ought to be turning to other cultures and other peoples to learn from their wisdom. One of the things that's really interesting when you study Proverbs, for example, like I do, is how many of the Proverbs that we hold as scriptural, that we read and we teach and we think about, have very similar counterparts in Egyptian culture, for example, and in other ancient Near East, Mesopotamia, Samaria. There are similar proverbs. Why? Because people have some similar experiences that they name and put into wise teachings. They may use their own vocabulary, certainly. They may have different ways of saying things, but they're speaking to some sort of truth that they find helpful for living.
Yes.
So it's a worldview. I would also want to say it's a way of being. And this is where it's complicated. When we think about what is wisdom, how do you know it's wisdom? It is a strange combination of two things. One is moral will, and the other is moral skill.
Yeah.
So moral will is a capacity. So if I have moral will, I can be in a circumstance, I can be in a situation, and I can discern what is happening accurately, and I can respond appropriately. So if I have moral will, it's a capacity, reading my situation, responding faithfully. Compared with that is moral will. Moral will is a disposition. So when I think about moral will, it is loving justice. It's seeking to do the right thing. It's wanting to be good and just and true and faithful. Now, wisdom both for ancient Israel and later then for the Greeks, required a combination of moral will and moral skill. Here's the trick. It's not enough simply to have moral skill. Moral skill without a love of justice, without a seeking to do the right thing, can all too quickly become manipulative, right? I can read the situation and now I can make it do what I want it to do, yes. Without being guided by my faith or about my sense of God's will, without being guided by a sense of deep justice. So I can have moral will, but with moral skill, but without moral will, moral skill can be quite dangerous. In the same way, if I have just moral will, but no capacity to read the room well or understand what's happening, I won't be effective. I won't be able to make good, just, and faithful things happen. So it's really important to think about what often makes wisdom difficult to name is that it's a combination. It requires being able to read the world and then put the tradition, the proverbs, the teachings, what you've been trained to think about wisdom, into fitting or appropriate application. It's not enough simply to know the wisdom tradition of the Bible without this capacity to also read your context and understand the circumstances. The ancients actually have proverbs about this. They have a proverb, Proverb 26:9, talks about the fool as waving around a proverb like a drunkard with a thorn. The thorn is kind of cutting into his hand. What is the point there is, of course, he can't land. He doesn't know how to use the teaching appropriately. So the fool kind of waves it around, thinking I've got the tradition, but I'm not applying it fittingly in the context. Conversely, the sages will describe a proverb that's fitly spoken at the right moment, like apples of gold in a setting of silver. It's exquisite.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Sure.
This is a good insight. I'm looking at you like, oh, okay.
I hope it's helpful.
It is helpful, and we appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah, we appreciate it. It's a very good introduction. Moral will, moral skills.
Yeah.
Have them together to be able to apply your wisdom properly. Yeah, we really appreciate it. So we can take a quick break, and then we'll come back to our viewers, and we'll continue from there with more from Dr. Yoder. Thank you very much.
My friends, and welcome to EMAV TV. If I Happy New Year to you. We trust that 2019 has been a very significant year for you. And we want to say thank you for saving us in 2019. Now we are in 2020. On behalf of EMAV TV, we want to say to you, welcome. Remember, EMAV TV is a very significant ministry, touching lives where necessary. We'd like to invite you to join us to our very transforming and transformative messages, our very impacting and a very healthy moment. We want to say to you, stay with us as we journey together in this year, learning, cultivating, and hearing and living in those wise words that flow from Scripture and from context. Thank you again for listening to us, and thank you for joining us. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Hello, my dear friends. This is EMAV TV. Indeed, we are touching lives. I encourage you to keep on watching EMAV TV, and I can assure you that your life will not be the same. EMAV TV, touching lives where necessary.
Hello, welcome back, viewers, from our quick break. I want to remind you we have with us Dr. Yoder of Columbia Theological Seminary today talking about wisdom. And I also want to remind you this is EMAV TV, and our main aim is to bring Christ to you just as he is and to know Christ for yourself. So when you get in touch with our videos, please do share with your friends and family so that we all together can know Christ very well, the way he wants us to know him. So I'm going to allow Dr. Yoder to continue from here where she started. She said a lot. If you have not seen it, go back and listen because it's very insightful. And I think God will bless you through that. So let's go back and let's continue. I'm learning a lot.
So we were talking about this way in which wisdom is a weaving together of moral skill and moral will. The capacity to read a situation in a way that resonates as true, and then apply teachings, apply wisdom into those circumstances in a way that people recognize as accurate. Think about preachers in some ways doing this every week. That is, they take the scripture, they take tradition, and they look at the world and they look at their community, they think about their congregation, they pray for wisdom, and they put tradition in conversation with the realities of the congregation's life. That is a form of wisdom. That's a way of connecting tradition to reality, to real world situations. So here's the thing. If you look at Ecclesiastes, a wisdom text, chapter 12, the very end of the book, the preacher or teacher, that is Ecclesiastes, describes himself as seeking to find fitting words and say them plainly. So he's doing this work as a teacher and preacher of taking the tradition, the wisdom tradition, all these proverbs and teachings, and connecting them with the community fittingly, like apples of gold and settings of silver. It resonates as true. So what do we learn from that? Well, one thing we learn from that is that proverbs simply cannot be dropped into any circumstance and be true. They're not universal fixed truths. Rather, they need to apply to a situation. They're slices of truth that have resonance for communities over time. The other thing to know is that proverbs are usually, I think most all of them, are what we would call multivalent. They have many meanings. So, for example, if I said to you, a rolling stone gathers no moss.
Okay.
Some see that as a caution against somebody who's always moving, always on the move, never settling down, never really having roots, never really letting life grow. So it's a problem to be a rolling stone.
Yeah.
Others would say the problem is actually that the person needs to move more, that this sort of moss is a problem, right? And they actually need to get moving. So it's a way of encouraging people to keep going. The proverb itself is the same proverb. It just depends on the circumstances. Who says it, to whom, when. Even the tone of voice can change how a proverb is heard. So it's important to think about proverbs not as these kind of fixed statements that we put in or we plug in to a certain moment, but rather we have to discern, where is this proverb fitting? Where is this proverb appropriate? So one other thing, or two other things at least to think about. One is that a refrain in the wisdom tradition is the phrase, fear of the Lord. So Proverbs 1:7, what we call the motto of the book of Proverbs, says the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now, interestingly, in the Hebrew, the word that's translated beginning has both the sense of starting point. Fear of the Lord is where you start. It also has the sense of the epitome of, the fullest expression of. Read that way, fear of the Lord is where the wise person ends up. So what is this fear of the Lord? What is this expression of wisdom? A fear of the Lord is called to live into all of the capacities God has given us. Capacity to see, to think, to engage our worlds, to move, to listen, to really engage fully using all of our senses, all of our reason in the world around us. But fear of the Lord is ultimately the recognition. It's a recognition of the humility we must have when we come up against the limits of human wisdom, always bounded by the sovereignty and power and mystery and wonder of God. So we think about fear of the Lord as, in some ways, some proverbs suggest it's actually fear. That God is so other, God is so far above and beyond us, that having actually the emotion of the fear that kind of keeps one alive, fight or flight fear, is actually appropriate in the face of the radical otherness and power of God. Others will talk about, other proverbs seem to suggest, fear of the Lord is awe. The kind of mysterium tremendums, the quaking in the presence of the holy, the recognition of God's majesty and power that causes within us this kind of awe, fear and trembling. And others talk about fear of the Lord as conscience. This is when you are so steeped in the teachings of God and love of God that you really can do no other. You shape every action, every word, informed by the power of God. So what ultimately is the beginning of wisdom and its fullest expression? It is fear of the Lord. It is the heartbeat of the wisdom tradition. And what it requires is not that we shirk from our responsibility, but rather we live fully into it, humbly, and openly, seeking the wisdom of God. So lastly, maybe I could just say a couple of things about how ancient Israel thought. How do you form a fear of the Lord? How is it that we can encourage this in one another? One thing I would say is there is a sense, in Proverbs especially, that one begins life as what they call a petty, P-E-T-I, a naive one, an inexperienced one. And that there's a window in all of our lives where good teachers, good parents especially, have a role in guiding us down the paths of wisdom. Or, if we're not formed, we end up wandering down paths of foolishness. Yeah. So there is a sense that there's a window of opportunity where the formation on the way of wisdom is critically important in the life of a young person. Yeah. Many ancient Near Eastern wisdom texts, including Proverbs, are set as the instruction of a father, particularly, although the mother's teaching is mentioned, the parent to the child. That this is important formative work. It's also lifelong work. There is never a sense, wisdom is, with one exception, never described with a possessive suffix. That is, you could say, once one says, oh, I have wisdom, one is an idiot. That is, one never fully grasps this. The posture of the seeker of wisdom is constantly kind of an open, receptive attentiveness to the world. Never a sense of kind of, I'm now wise, because in that moment, once you say, I am wise, you stop seeking. And that in and of itself is deeply problematic for the ancient sages. So it's no surprise that the metaphor of the way or the road, of course a metaphor that's very important to Christian believers about our lives of faith, it's no surprise that these ancient texts conceived of the search for wisdom as like being on a path, like being on a way, dynamic, unfolding, always on the move, very much a kind of sense that every step has consequences. So having this kind of constant moving through the world and trying to make good judgments with each step, we have to do our part to seek. In the end, for ancient Israel, these texts assert wisdom is a gift. So wisdom can't be attained by our striving. Wisdom can't be attained by our determination and by our sheer effort. Wisdom ultimately is a gift from God that we receive gratefully.
Thank you very much.
Thank
This
you.
is insightful. And I'm glad we are doing this because I'm learning a lot from it.
Thank you.
So, you just said wisdom is a gift from God.
Yes.
Is this gift given to everybody?
That's a great question. And there's a debate, actually, among biblical interpreters about just that question.
Okay.
There does seem to be, especially in the book of Proverbs, there does seem to be a sense in which fools who may become what they call scoffers or mockers, people who even sometimes physically rebuke teaching, they push against it. They might even strike their teachers, some of the Proverbs suggest. Those who get kind of hardened into the way of foolishness may not receive the gift of wisdom. That is, they've stopped looking for it. They've stopped wanting it, and have chosen a quite different path.
So complacency.
Complacency or even determination not to. There's a phrase, when you're wise in your own eyes, right? That's a red flag in the wisdom literature. Those who are wise in their own eyes are not actually really looking at the world. They're not actually seeking wisdom. And the more that becomes kind of a hardened rejection of wisdom, the less likely it is that they'll journey down the path of wisdom and receive the benefits that that affords.
Okay, so we've usually heard that there's worldly wisdom and there's godly wisdom. Can you help us with that?
It's a great question. It's really a kind of contrast in some ways that develops certainly in the New Testament. There's a sense of the kind of foolishness of human knowledge and wisdom against the wisdom of God's own. So that's an important biblical tradition. I've been working more in texts that don't necessarily set those at odds with one another, but rather human knowledge, human wisdom, under this very important framework of the fear of the Lord, is an important resource that human experience, because we've been created by God, is and can be a form of revelation. We learn something from our experiences, and those have value. This tradition lifts that up as being important. Yeah. So we turn to our elders, we turn to others of other cultures to learn from the wisdom. It's valuable. It's always bounded by a sense of a humility in the face of divine mystery.
So it's not wrong to be wise.
Correct. It's not wrong, and it's not wrong to seek the wisdom of others. It's not wrong to sit with those you recognize as being wise and learn from them. It's all kind of a prayerful, faithful act of trying to become wise, and then of course always being careful to be humble in the pursuit of it, to be diligent and humble.
Okay. So, but with that, the human wisdom comes in there. The wisdom of God, because it's the bigger umbrella.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly. In the same way that the ant has something to teach us, we have something to teach each other about what this is.
But it has to go in accordance with that of God.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. That's
Thank
right.
you. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
So, why is it easy to turn to the world's wisdom? I mean, it looks like we are quick to turn to that, because that makes more...
We are quick, and there's plenty out there. I think the vision, at least, that the ancient Israelites would encourage us about is that the wisdom of the world is an important resource. We should look at it. We should consider it. We should engage it. We do so always formed by our deep commitments to God and our openness to God's own instruction, as through prayer and revelation and all the other ways in which we experience God's guidance in our lives. So it's a complementary task to seek and learn from one another, and prayerfully always put that in conversation with God's own guidance of us and our lives.
But you see, humans prefer to go with human wisdom and forget about the wisdom of God.
Right.
Why is it so?
I think that differs. My sense is that differs for different people. The reasons for that are different for different people. I think sometimes it's they don't find communities that encourage them in the pursuit of wisdom of God, or they feel really surrounded by some of the in Proverbs there's this real sense that folly or foolishness is very appealing. It's enticing, and so it's easy to be pulled into things that are not actually wise, that we dare not downplay how easy it is to be steered off the path of wisdom onto the path of foolishness.
Okay, so do we need wisdom in our lives?
Absolutely, absolutely. It is as ancient Israel understood it. Wisdom is the means. It's a hugely important component in human flourishing. It's necessary, and it's the path of wisdom that leads to life and well-being, honor, and prosperity.
And so, if we seek wisdom, who do we ask?
Well, I hope I've spoken to some of this.
Yeah.
I think, as the parent in Proverbs 1-9 would say, keep listening, keep leaning in, keep turning to the wisdom of your elders. Keep watching the world around you. Keep listening to the wisdom of other cultures. And keep watching your own experience and learning from it and benefiting from it, being wiser the next time. And of course, constantly be pursuing through prayer, through study, through community formation, through all the ways in which we learn about God's own wisdom for us, seek to be a fearer of the Lord.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. So my last question will be, what's the difference between wisdom, knowledge, and understanding?
So for the ancients, they often use, if you look at the wisdom literature specifically, and if you look at the poetic literature in Proverbs, they often will use those terms like insight or understanding as synonyms with wisdom. So wisdom in poetry will be juxtaposed with these other terms.
Oh, okay.
So there does seem to be kind of a cluster of terms that say something about what it is to be wise. At the same time, I think there really is an insistence that you don't necessarily need to have a formal education. You don't necessarily have to have a certain level of IQ, to use a postmodern concept. You don't have to be off the charts intelligent to be deeply wise. So there are ways in which there are distinctions that are made between some of those capacities as we think about them. But they're all seen as being somehow part and parcel of the life of the wise person.
Okay. Thank you very much. Viewers,
Thank you.
I believe you've learned a lot. I have learned a lot from today's discussion. So before we go, can you give your last word to the viewers about wisdom?
Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Well, I would first of all want to just be thankful, express my gratitude for this opportunity, and to encourage us all to continue on the path toward wisdom, to seek it diligently, and to pray for it with all of our hearts, and be watchful, attentive, and alert.
Thank you very much once again. So viewers, we have brought our discussion to a close. I'll use this opportunity to thank you officially again.
Thank you
for coming.
Thank you for
and
having
for
me.
all that you have said to us today. And also to appreciate my husband, who is behind the camera making all this happen. He's the producer, Mr. Evans Barminta, and Mr. Richard Johnson, who is constantly on the show to make sure our question and everything is going on well. We appreciate everybody. And everybody who works in any way in prayer or anything to support the ministry of EMAV TV. We appreciate you, and we pray that God bless us all. So we will see you same time next week. Come to us. Learn from us. Share with your people. Do not just look at it and go. There's so much information and there's things that's going to make your life change. It's important that you listen and share around so that we all will be a blessing. So that one day when Christ comes, we will not have any excuse to say we didn't know, because we know now. Okay? So God bless you. We will see you same time next week. Bye-bye.
Hello, my dear friends. This is EMAV TV. Indeed, we are touching lives. I encourage you to keep on watching EMAV TV, and I can assure you that your life will not be the same. EMAV TV, touching lives where necessary.